today, and that is HM Treasury's aim to achieve a better quality of life. And I call Joe Swinson.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr McRae. And I'm delighted to be able to introduce this debate today. I have a vivid memory of one of the first economics lecturers I attended during my time at the London School of Economics. The lecturer, the excellent Maurice Perelman, who's sadly no longer still with us, was right at the beginning making it clear to the undergraduates the distinction between money and wealth. Money is pieces of paper, or numbers, he said. But wealth that you have is the sum of all the things that you value, both the things with a monetary value attached, like your home and possessions, but also the things without a price tag, such as relationships, a feeling of security, and your health. And it's not just economists. Philosophers too contribute to the debate about what we really value. Earlier this year, A.C. Grayling said, "Happiness is the measure of true wealth." In this debate today, I will explore how we can measure this wider definition of the nation's wealth and what implications it has for policy making. I will argue that levels of happiness are important, useful and integral to the concept of quality of life, which is something that other governments around the world and even other departments in the UK are acknowledging. I will argue that happiness can be measured reliably and robustly, and that there are practical things the Treasury can and should do in order to improve the nation's happiness and quality of life. The stated aim of the Treasury is to raise the rate of sustainable growth and achieve rising prosperity and a better quality of life with economic and employment opportunities for all. I commend the Treasury for including a better quality of life in its aim, but question whether this is taken as seriously as the growth and prosperity aims. Yet, without taking quality of life into consideration, growth is meaningless. GDP grows after natural disasters or oil spills, as the clean-up operation is costly, but it obviously does not follow that such events are desirable. If GDP growth comes as a result of us working longer hours, we may find that our quality of life is negatively affected. Indeed, a DTI study in 2004 found that 87% of employees said they would like to spend more time with friends and family. If some of these employees cut their working hours to see their family more, GDP would fall. But is this a bad thing when that decision is enhancing their quality of life? And the research shows quite clearly that our quality of life is not getting better. The World Values Survey tells us that, if anything, as a nation we are less happy now than in the early 1980s. And we can go back further using polling evidence from Gallup, which shows that despite the increases in GDP, we're less happy even than in the 1950s. Back in 1968, the late Robert Kennedy said in a famous speech, "There is more to life than GDP." The debate has continued ever since about the best ways for societies to measure progress. The blinkered pursuit of GDP growth on its own can lead to perverse decisions. We should recognise its limitations and introduce other measures to capture quality of life. This idea is gaining momentum. Last week, Ipsos Mori dedicated their summer conference to the subject under the title "Who's Happy Now?" Governments around the world are looking seriously at going beyond GDP, and not just in Bhutan. Earlier this year, the French President, Nicolas Sarkozy, commissioned eminent economists Joseph Stiglitz and Amartya Sen to develop alternative measures of progress to GDP that better reflect people's well-being. 48 members from all sides of this House have signed my early day motion number 731, acknowledging static levels of happiness and the need for the government to measure and address this. And the British public agree. In 2006, the BBC commissioned GfK NOP poll found that 81% of the British public think that the government's prime objective should be happiness, not wealth. And as I mentioned, other government departments are also addressing this issue. In 2002, the Cabinet Office commissioned a paper on the subject called "Life Satisfaction, the State of Research and Implications for Government." Although not a statement of policy, the paper declared that there is a case for state intervention to boost life satisfaction due mainly to evidence of direct impacts on life satisfaction of government activities, together with strong evidence of the dependence of individuals' well-being on the actions of others. It suggested a range of actions that the government could take, including, right at the top of the list, the use of life satisfaction data to construct quality of life indices. Following the 2007 UNICEF study of 20 developed nations that children in the UK ranked lowest in terms of happiness and well-being, the Department of Children, Schools and Families has introduced SEAL classes, or so-called happiness lessons, in schools. The Department of Communities and Local Government has included subjective wellbeing measures in its new 2008 National Indicators set, which will be used by local authorities to keep track of progress. It's also supporting the Local Wellbeing Project, which is being conducted by the Young Foundation to test practical interventions to improve people's happiness in 3 local authority areas in the UK. And DEFRA has started to measure life satisfaction as part of its Sustainable Development Indicators and has commissioned a sizable body of research that highlights ways in which government action could impact on happiness. I very much welcome these moves. Many government departments are beginning to take this seriously. But to bring it all together and coordinate what will otherwise be piecemeal efforts, the Treasury needs to take a lead. Sadly, when I raised this with the Chancellor last November, while he waxed lyrical about growth and prosperity, he seemed less than serious when he said, "I am willing to consider a Liberal Democrat happiness index." I hope I am wrong and that the Treasury does indeed have an open mind about creating robust measures of quality of life. And if the Treasury is to consider measuring quality of life, it obviously needs to be defined. On the 22nd of February this year, I asked the Chancellor and received an answer of what definition the Treasury is using. And the answer said, productivity and employment are the key determinants of growth and therefore of living standards. However, a large volume of other data are also important indicators for a broader measure of quality of life, such as those on crime, working hours, social capital, social demography and health. The answer rightly recognises that living standards are not the same as quality of life. Living standards have certainly increased in recent decades, but as I have covered already, quality of life has not. Crime, working hours, social capital, health and so on are all important to quality of life. But with such a vague definition, it's not clear how the Treasury is able to measure overall progress towards its aim of a better quality of life. And the answer also misses out the vital part of how quality of life should be defined, by asking people. Measuring the subjective well-being of individuals is essential if we are to know how the quality of life is changing. Asserting that quality of life has increased on a range of sterile indicators is not much use if people don't feel any happier or more satisfied with their lives. Some would argue that happiness cannot be studied or measured accurately. However, the science tells us otherwise. The well-respected Labour peer, Lord Layard, goes over the evidence at some length in his 2005 book, Happiness: Lessons from a New Science. He's clear that the answers an individual gives to subjective well-being questions not only match the answers that friends or independent observers would give about their well-being, but also correlate with scans indicating activity in corresponding parts of the brain. Furthermore, the government's own sources suggest that a life satisfaction question is both robust and useful. A DEFRA paper last year, Sustainable Development Indicators in Your Pocket, states, the independent research commissioned by DEFRA concluded that life satisfaction measures should provide reliable information about well-being in a policy context. Of course, just asking people how satisfied or happy they are on its own may be interesting, but won't help government understand how to enhance quality of life. That's where a range of indicators need to be developed and over time correlated with the subjective well-being question, so trends can be established and policies changed accordingly. And there is already a large body of research into the determinants of happiness. A paper commissioned by DEFRA called Review of Research on the Influences on Personal Wellbeing and Application to Policy Making, written by Professor Paul Dolan and others in 2006, gives a comprehensive review of the research so far. The findings on income and work in particular are interesting. It says, the majority of individual level studies find a positive association between absolute income and well-being, as we might assume to be the case, given that most people tend to try hard to increase their income. However, it goes on to say that the results generally suggest that there are diminishing returns to income, i.e. the well-being hit of income falls as income rises. Beyond a certain point, therefore, policies that prioritise making us richer will not necessarily yield large payoffs in terms of our happiness. However, the Treasury is right to identify employment as a key driver for quality of life, though this is not just about the growth as a result of higher employment, as they might suggest. Instead, the DEFRA paper found that being unemployed has severe and long-lasting negative consequences for life satisfaction and happiness, which cannot be explained only in terms of the loss of income. The conclusion from this is that even once someone who has been unemployed has returned to work, they are unhappier than they were before, because the experience of being unemployed increases their feeling of insecurity while in work. I know that as a Labour member, the Minister will welcome this finding, suggesting an even greater focus on ensuring everyone has a genuine opportunity to work. Regardless of the level of income, inequality negatively impacts on quality of life. People would rather earn £50,000 in a society where everyone else earns £25,000 than earn £100,000 in a society where everybody else is earning £250,000. Therefore, the issue of income inequality is important, and so it's especially worrying that, according to the Institute of Fiscal Studies and the Gini coefficient, under this government, the gap between the rich and poor has widened. On the issue of income and work, I think the current personal debt crisis is also important to bear in mind. The evidence shows quite clearly that while secured debt, such as a mortgage, does not negatively impact on someone's quality of life, large amounts of unsecured debt cause a great deal of worry and unhappiness. And interestingly, the DEFRA paper also points out that commuting is, according to the research, generally associated with lower levels of life satisfaction and mood. Yet it's rare that ministers make proud declarations about efforts to cut the average commute of British citizens. This is not just about congestion, it's about adopting a different approach to how and where we work. Taken in hand with people saying they want more time with friends and family, the case for moving to more flexible working practices is overwhelming. We need to tackle the culture of presenteeism and use technology to cut out unnecessary commutes. This would also have environmental benefits too. Research points to many other factors that have an impact. Health is a major one, especially and unsurprisingly as we get older. Locus of control is also a common influencer of life satisfaction. When people feel that decisions are made for them and they have little influence over the events in their lives, they tend to be unhappier. All of this information should be shaping government policy, which brings me to the action that the Treasury should take. An Ipsos Mori poll found that 85% of people in the UK agree that policies should put less emphasis on consumption and more emphasis on other aspects of the quality of life. In order to prioritise improving quality of life, it's essential to measure it and research what affects it. So the first and most obvious thing to do is to create an index of the nation's happiness. The old adage, what gets measured gets done, has a ring of truth about it here. No one bothered about GDP 100 years ago because we didn't have the tools to measure it. Now it seems to be the obsession of most governments around the world, although, as I have mentioned, that is changing. A happiness index, including subjective wellbeing measures and a range of quality of life indicators, would complement GDP as a general measure of progress. It would provide a tangible way of monitoring the Treasury's goal of creating a better quality of life, and would help to better identify the policy levers that could be used to enhance happiness in the future. Importantly, it would also provide greater clarity within government. Many departments now refer to the concepts of quality of life or well-being in their mission statements, but there is no common measurement. In developing such an index, I argue that the government should stick to 5 key principles. It should be well grounded in the science, it should be conducted at regular intervals, have a large sample size, be robust against manipulation, and ideally be part of an international effort to enable comparisons across nations, hence the early day motion calling for the government to work closely with the French as they develop their index. However, even before such an index is created, the Treasury could integrate existing happiness research into its work. In allocating resources, in assessing new policies, in deciding on priorities, the supporting evidence on well-being should be consulted. Much as the environmental or budgetary impact of a policy is looked at, the well-being impact should also be considered.
Would my honourable friend give way?
I certainly will give way.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way, and I came in to listen to this debate, interested to find out what it was going to be all about, to be honest. Would she agree, and I agree with everything that she said, but would she agree that if we were to adopt the strategy that she's proposing, it would give a much stronger case for saving local post offices and other services that perhaps the government sees as not a financial priority?
I very much agree with my honourable friend, and I think post offices are a good example of a local service where the social impact and the value it brings to a community is not necessarily captured within financial measurements, and he makes his point very well. But this isn't always about spending more money, the Minister will be glad to hear. Indeed, sometimes taking wellbeing into the equation may lead to ending practices and projects that cost money, or implementing policies which save money. A cross-departmental approach is crucial, as sometimes the spending will be in one department and the saving in another. For example, the Layard proposals on mental health to train new cognitive behavioural therapists to help people with depression get back to work will save money from the incapacity benefit bill, and I'm very pleased the government has taken those ideas on board. But there are many other examples that we're missing out on because we are currently not measuring quality of life in any regular, clear and robust way. I hope in her response the Minister will take my views on board and explain whether the Treasury is prepared to look at creating a wellbeing index for use across government, as well as to coordinate efforts across departments to use existing research to improve quality of life, as its own mission statement commits it to do.